Please be seated. Thank you very much, Ms. Hamazibugo. And thank you very much to the coordinator of this function on behalf of the province of Mpumalanga. Actually, you have made, Ron, my task very easy. Because I don't have to say, I acknowledge so-and-so, I greet so-and-so, you have done all that. So in the interest of time, I'll just go straight to what I wanted to say. And I promise you, I'll try to be as brief as possible. And MEC, I think we probably meeting for the first time, and I'm very honored that you were able to accept our invitation. So mine is just, first of all, to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that MRM-Mpumalanga has achieved over the years under the able leadership of my good Reverend Ntali. And with all the people who have worked with you, have supported you on the side of the civil society, but also acknowledges the very profound role that government in its various structures and formations have played a role. Not to forget to mention the fact that D.S. Medladla was born here. So it's home. I'm coming here home, and I'm very happy to be here amongst people that I've known and people in the environment that I appreciated very much. Perhaps lest we forget, on a more mundane level, empirical scientists have now proved that what they call the first science of human consciousness was actually here in Barberton. In other words, the first, call it human being, it was not completely, totally developed, and that's it. But the first science, or if you like, the first nucleus of human beings has been discovered by paleontologists here in Barberton. So you guys may not be aware of what you have in your hands, the treasure, apart from the beauty of of your province, as a whole. Seth has very ably referred to the theme of this get-together. Confronting the unethical behavior which negates the fundamental objectives of the National Democratic Revolution. Lest we forget, let's take a step back about how we link Mandela's birthday, which is on the 18th of July, with the celebration of MRM. Now, it's a celebration that will be with us as long as this movement exists, or even as long as there are problems of a moral nature that are facing us. And I feel, of course, also particularly encouraged and emboldened to be here, because I have my colleagues here who are members of the board, Umafagute and Unkos Lapo Umavos. Anyway, they've all been introduced already. So I would just want to add a word of deep gratitude that they've continued to steer this ship, and together we're trying to see how best we can make it work. So, again, to remind ourselves, maybe let me rather tell you a story rather than read a formal speech. When I was Deputy Minister of Education, I went to see Mandela and Mr. Thabo Mbeki. That was to discuss issues of education, because that was my area of work. I requested half an hour, and this is no exaggeration. We went on for almost 3 hours, not discussing education, but discussing the moral challenges that were facing the new government, the post-apartheid administration. And that is a fact. So Mandela looked at me and they said, well, Mkhatshwa, why umfundisi wena? What are you going to do about this? So I said, listen, don't ask me to undertake a massive task like that. It requires the whole nation and so on. So to cut a long story short, it was agreed in principle that they thought this was a good initiative. So the late Cedric Mason and I embarked on a consultative process, the whole country, civil society, government departments, artists, you name them, women's organizations and so on. At the end of which then, or in between, Mandela then came up with a statement of a call for the RDP of the soul. What that simply makes it very simple language. Mandela looked at the document, ANC prepared documents that were called Ready to Govern. I'm sure you have read those yourselves and so on. He looked at them and he says, great stuff, good English, and the content very good, but there's one thing missing. There's no spiritual or moral content in all these documents. And if you ignore that, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be in trouble as a country, because it has happened in other countries where they have ignored the moral basis. And by that, Mandela was not saying we should go to church, we should go to the mosque and so on. He was basically pointing out to the fact that had been also part of the history, the growth of the movement itself. Namely that there are certain values of behavior that should actually inform the interpersonal, intergovernmental relationships. That's basically what you are saying. That there are certain things that you don't have to wait for Mfundis to tell you, lento lena iphume endleleni is wrong or something like that. The community, the people themselves, your own conscience, common sense tells you, if you behave like this, you are behaving like an animal. You are not behaving like a human. Basically those. But then he said, in order for that to work, we should find a way to inculcate this in our work, in our structures. What did he then do? Cedric and I convened meetings of political leaders then, because remember, this was post-1994. Leaders of churches, especially the main churches, Muslims, of course, Christians, Jews, and all the main churches. He had a meeting with them to see to what extent they could make a contribution to this idea, because at that time it was not a structure, just an idea. The rest is history. They made a commitment, documents that are available. What also happened, and I even remember specifically, it was in 1998, because at that time I already remember the ANC had become the dominant party, the main almost governing party and so on. And then the ANC NEC produced a formal document to lead its members, but also to make a contribution to this new challenge of moral regeneration. It's called Ethical Transformation, ANC Statement on the Moral Renewal of the Nation. You can read it yourself, it's available. Contains all the sort of issues that we've spoken about. Fast forward, in 2002, after Cedric and I had gone out throughout the country and so on, and canvassed the opinions of people, we then gave rise to more than 2,000 people present from all the provinces to what then came to be called the Moral Regeneration Movement, whose aims was very clearly defined. That MRM, the movement, that's why we call it a movement. It had to be inclusive of all segments of society, organizations, ideologies, political, religious parties, you name it, cultural organizations. It was inclusive, totally inclusive, so that a Muslim could stand up and own MRM as his own. So can political parties. So can organized labor, professional organizations, each one of them individually and collectively could claim that MRM also belonged to them. And not only just as the declaration and so on, but also its contents and its mission. Two key decisions were taken then. One decision was that MRM must be led, MRM must be controlled by civil society, not government. Civil society, not individual churches, not individual, you name them, political parties or anything of the sort, that it had to belong to all the people of South Africa, because its agenda was very important also for the future of the, of the country as a whole. Then in 1997, that was taking a step back, at Mafikeng ANC annual conference, Mandela gave an almost 2-hour speech. And again, you can go and read this yourself, it's on record. Specifically on what he called moral renewal. Because in a way it's very prophetic. He already could see signs of the times of what was going to happen already at that time. And I'm actually I'm always remember that event with fond memories, because Reverend Mehana and I entirely would know him. We officiated at the handover, symbolic handover of authority from Mandela to Thabo Mbeki. Kwakhona nje something like Induku, something like that. We blessed it and so on and so on. And then we, Iskumba or something like that on Thabo Mbeki, we handed over this to him, kind of in symbolic gesture. So I remember that with very, very, very fond memories. Because then somehow it reminded me of another role that I had played. When P.W., not Botha, but de Klerk, when he announced the unbanning of all political organizations and so on, early 90s and so on and so on. At that time, the ANC MK cadres trained had not yet been allowed to come back into the country. So Cyril, our Cyril, the president, Eric Molobe, Murphy Morobe, Eric Lobesi, and all these, when I said, you'll remember that, we came together and we asked ourselves, how are we going to receive this news from Robben Island and so on, especially Mandela, because he was most vulnerable. So we got together and we divided responsibilities among ourselves. I think Cyril was our chair. Someone else was responsible for accommodation, transport, offices, and believe it or not, you will smile at this one. I said, Mkhatshwa, comrade, when I will be responsible for the security of all these old topies and so on, and especially Mandela, because he's the most vulnerable one. So that's the role I played. I found myself playing the role of being, and we had, of course, a team of comrades and so on, to make sure that Mandela was safe, Sisulu and all those guys and so on, until, of course, because we were just acting until the MKs came back and we would hand over. So therefore, in that responsibility, I came to know him personally very well, because it's his home in Orlando West. I had to be there to vet people that were coming there and so on. So someone after asked the question, but how do you ask Mfundisi? Mfundisi was in the security and so on. So one of the comrades says, well, no. The reason was a very simple one. Because when they asked me, and I said, no, I know nothing about this thing. All what I know is underground, because even all of the comrades, that we have done. But what we're being expected to do now, none of us know. So that's what they said, but who among us? So we better do it. And then one of the guys, tongue-in-cheek, he says, you see, we're now Mfundisi. Should it happen that, God forbid, that Mandela is shot or one of the is shot and dies, you have got the power to immediately make sure you go straight to heaven. So that's part of the power that you, that you have. But anyway, serious note. So that's how I got to know Mandela and therefore admire him. Not only as a political leader, but as a person, as a leader, as a servant of the people. And that's how I came to work very, very, very closely with him. And then, of course, with the other comrades. And then in 1994, he made the following statement. That was actually at his inauguration as president. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long, must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. Our daily deeds as ordinary South Africans must produce an actual South African reality that will reinforce humanity's belief in justice, strengthen its confidence in the nobility of human soul, and sustain all our hopes for a glorious life for all. Very profound statement. That was Mandela. I'll read you another one later on, when I conclude. That also came from him, which showed also his profound wisdom. Then, after we launched the MRM, at each and every or rather occasion of a national conference or other even government organizations, there was always a standing item: moral regeneration for the new country. Then I'm just rushing this forward. In 1903, which was a year after the MRM was launched, Cabinet met. We were not even invited. And Cabinet took two decisions. That in order to support this new MRM to continue the good work that it has started, which is very important for the country, we're going to support them in two ways. One way is to give some sort of financial contribution support, which unfortunately was not quantified, which also has led to a position that in you'll correct me, Seth, that in the last 21 years, if you put together all the contributions from government, it's not more than 65 million. 21 years is not more than that. So you can therefore imagine that, what do you do with that if you calculate that per annum? What do you do if you look at what needs to be done? What do you do with that amount? Which is no problem, because it was just say we could not decide for them how much they wanted to contribute. The second decision linked to that was that whoever, not even whoever, the office of the deputy president, whoever's deputy president, will then act as a patron. the office, not the individual, of the MRM. That has been excellent for us, very good. But to be honest about it, it has also subjected us to a lot of criticism about all sorts of things. We have no control over that. But just so that you know the background, because I'm sure you hear all kinds of stories, some of them very distorted. But I just thought, in all fairness, as this leadership here, it's also good for us to be made clear of specific facts. I'm almost done. 2 points that I also need to make. We've received support from the 9 provinces. Some of that support was excellent, was very good, but also raised a lot of controversies about it, because there came a confusion between the government, between the MRM as MRM, and the government program on moral regeneration, not MRM. So some people confuse the two, with the result, therefore, that there have been also sometimes even quite some tensions because of that. And I don't, blame those people. Sometimes it's our fault. It's said here, that's his fault, it's my fault, that we don't always take some of this through to new premiers to brief them properly about what is expected, the official relationship and so on. But it's something we're working on, which actually is going to be dealt with. Then we have a situation where we now have a new government structure called the GNU. Now the GNU also poses challenges for the MRM. Challenges in the sense that the government practice and so on is no longer going to be exactly the same thing. I'll be honest with you, before the president put together his cabinet, we were worried, but what sort of minister are you going to put in there as Minister of Arts and Culture? Because we do know, I won't mention names, but some of the other certain political parties were probably very hostile to us, because they thought, no, we just belong to that party, we were just this, and so on. And so we just wanted that if they put a minister there who is not friendly to us, or does not even share our agenda, we're in big trouble. Which therefore eventually raises the question, to what extent is then MRM independent, especially in terms of resources, including financial resources? Because if you are not independent, you can't really be free to do what you are supposed to do. There's a way in which you have to compromise here and there, to compromise and so on, and therefore your effectiveness and efficiency to some extent gets the influence, you know. But the good news is that I think we can learn from certain examples, because there are some cases where, hey, some of those premiers and even MECs and so, they've been great. They've done great. But the problem is that we have no influence over who becomes an MEC, who becomes a minister, who becomes that. Sometimes you get people there that are really very, but who understand. And then they are succeeded by people who are very negative. What's this thing called MRM? So that way, which therefore means Babentali and your team. It's about time. It means me, Seth, all of us. I think it's about, we've done that, yes, I'm not saying we've done that we try as much as possible to be real partner, in partnership with government, so that we don't just wait for government to be feeding us and so on. We want to be able to say, Mr. Government or Madam Government, this is what we want to do, we have so much. Can you please top it up? Mr. Government, can you please assist us? We're doing fundraising, so that at least we can also help you, government, because we're aware you have lots of other responsibilities and so. Otherwise, we are not really an independent. That's the problem. And I'm saying what is good about it is that I think lots of the leadership of the MRM, they are painfully aware of that, and they are doing something about it, because even now we don't know exactly the GNU, because it's no longer and typically ANC government. Now it must consult with these other people, some of whom may not necessarily, I don't want to say hostile to it, but they don't really understand. And that will compromise the good work that you have been doing, that I'm sure you'll want to continue to do. Finally, to say, Babental, there are certain questions that will be put to you, probably have been put to you already by the ordinary people. They say 20 or 30 in 30 years, the land question has not changed. Millions of ordinary people are still tenants in their own land. So the whole problem of the land, not just as an emotional thing, because with land you are not just talking about agriculture, growing food, and so on and so on. That's where the mines are, that's where your platinum is, that's where all these other things, when we are talking about climate change, we are talking about tourism and so on and so on. That's all land, it's all one thing. It manifests itself in various. Where are we with regard to? And I'm mentioning this just as one example, because it affects the people. And as MRM, whatever affects the people negatively becomes a challenge to us, becomes part of our agenda. They will be asking you also the question, how come that in 30 years there are so many murders of black people taking place daily, not once a week, daily? How come there's still so much poverty, unemployment? How come so many women and girls are being murdered and abused? How come that the system of education that we have still has this disparity? That, for instance, at the moment, a high percentage of our young boys and girls, they cannot read for understanding. Whereas the others who go to private schools and so on, they get the cream of the thing. And that influence later on in the question when people have to look for work, when people have to try to empower themselves, because a good education gives people power, strength, skills, even thinking, even hopefully ethical values and so on is as important. They will ask you that question. I don't know what you are going to say to them. I'm still maybe going to pray to find out what I should say, because that is the truth, what they are saying. I cannot deny that. But in other words, what I'm saying, therefore, this should be part of the work that MRM should be discussing. You don't go there with answers to the people. You engage people in dialogue, because some of them can come up with wonderful ideas and explanations. To conclude, in 1999, addressing Parliament, that was before he exited the stage of presidency, he says, the values of human solidarity that once drove our quest for a humane society seem to have been replaced or are being threatened by a crass materialism and pursuit of social goals of instant gratification. One of the challenges of our time, without being pietistic or moralistic, is to reinstill in the consciousness of our people that sense of humanity, with all what that implies. So, Babental, that is in thanking you for all the good work you and your team that we have done, not only to prepare for this national Mandela / MRM Day, but for the work you have done throughout so many years and so on. And some people were saying, kunabafundisi ababili, they've been there for such a long time, MRM, and so on and so on and so on. And abanye, maybe they've even forgotten what they are supposed to do or something like that. Untali no Mkhatshwa. So that's part of the thing. But anyway, that's on a lighter note, because we're preparing for the national conference where we'll report back on some of the good work that you guys have been doing, but also to invite you as MRM Mpumalanga. Please make yourselves available to participate in the preparations. Give you an example, one of them will be drawing up a constitution, finalizing all that, just one example. Ladies and gentlemen, comrades, thank you very much once again, and I wish you everything of the best, and together let us march forward in faith, solidarity, and confidence. Thank you.